The ship burned slow in the dawn. The sea was flat and bright. Oil spread in a thin film that smelled sharp and sweet. I stood in the boat with 9 men and a broken oar. The hull behind us listed and spat steam. The deck gun sat crooked. The barrel pointed at the sky. Cape Guardafui lay off our starboard bow. The headland was a pale tooth in the heat. The wind came in dry and hot. Salt stuck to my lips. The sun lifted and made the shoreline shine like glass. We counted the boats that got clear. We lost one in the smoke. We watched the ship settle. A brown line ran along the coast. Sand, rock, scrub, no pier, no tower, no flag. Only the hint of a track cut through the dunes. I kept the compass on my knee and checked the drift. Current pulled us south along the Somali shore. We could not signal. We could not raise a mast. We chose the coast because there was no choice left. That choice set the rest in motion. Before we begin, make sure to hit the subscribe button and help the channel grow. I was a corporal with the Marine Security Detail aboard the SS Meridian Point, a Liberty ship under War Shipping Administration contract. We were 10 Marines plus a Navy Armed Guard crew of 12. The rest were merchant sailors, 32 men under Captain Harris, a steady man from Maine, who had been at sea since the last war. We were sailing from Durban to Suez with a load of crated trucks, medical supplies, and ammunition for the British 8th Army. The year was 1942. The Indian Ocean had become dangerous. German U-boats had started operating there, and Japanese submarines were sighted off Madagascar. Convoys were scattered, and our ship had been ordered to travel alone for a stretch to make up time. It was supposed to be a low-risk leg. Our Marine job was to guard the ship against boarders and protect the armed guard gunners during action. We drilled daily on small arms, damage control, and evacuation. Our quarters were below the aftergun platform. We slept near the sound of the twin .50s in the 3-inch deck gun. Most of us had been in uniform less than 2 years, but we knew how to stay organized. The sea north of Madagascar was calm that week. Hot air rolled off the water like fire. We stood watch in pairs, scanning for wakes or periscopes. The captain kept the ship zigzagging every 10 minutes. The armed guard tested the signal lamp and radio daily, but reception was weak this far east. 2 nights before the attack, we picked up faint Morse. A British ship, HMS Flamingo, was warning of a suspected raider somewhere south of Aden. We noted it in the log. Captain Harris decided to run closer to the Somali coast to shorten the route to the Gulf. None of us liked it. The charts showed reefs and shoals all along that coast. We saw the first shell splash just before sunrise, about 12 miles off Cape Guardafui. The first thought was a warning shot, then the second came closer, and the radio operator shouted that the frequency was jammed. We went to general quarters. The gunners swung the 3-inch aft gun around, but the horizon stayed empty. Whoever fired was beyond our range. The third shell struck aft near the winch deck. It tore through the bulkhead and lit one of the truck crates. Fire spread fast. Smoke filled the companionways. I remember the sound of boots on steel and someone calling out for the extinguishers. The engine telegraph clanged, then went dead. The whole ship shook as another round hit near the stern. We could not see the attacker, only a gray blur moving on the horizon. The captain ordered abandon ship. We launched 4 lifeboats, 1 half damage. The engine room crew came up coughing black smoke. The radio burned before we could send position again. I stayed on deck until the last signal flare was fired. When we cleared the ship, we watched her burn. The guns were silent. We thought about returning if the shelling stopped, but the fire made it impossible. The ship's back broke mid-morning. The sound was deep and hollow. The mast tilted, then vanished in a sheet of smoke. By noon, we had drifted 5 miles south. The current pulled hard along the coast. The sun hit like a hammer. We took turns bailing water from the boat. No one spoke much. I remember one sailor asking what was on that shore. None of us knew. The maps called it Barren Coast. We rationed water, 1 canteen cap each every 2 hours. We had a compass, a first aid kit, and half a box of signal flares. The wind shifted east by afternoon. That meant we were drifting toward the Somali coast faster than planned. We could see the line of sand rise higher each hour. The captain's plan was simple: stay together. Wait for a patrol plane. If none came by sunset, head for the shore. The smoke from the sinking ship might draw attention, but it might also bring whoever fired on us. Either way, the coast was closer than any ship. That night, the phosphorescence glowed in our wake. The stars were sharp. We heard the sound of surf, steady and distant. The smell of land carried on the wind. I remember thinking the coast looked too still. It looked like a wall with no door, but we turned toward it because there was nowhere else to go. We reached the coast on the second morning. The sky was white with heat. The wind came in short bursts that carried sand far out over the water. Our oars were blistered and cracked, but the current helped us drift into a narrow cove. The cliffs were low and pale, cut by dry gullies. No houses, no smoke, only the sound of waves breaking against coral. We grounded the boat in knee-deep water and dragged it up past the tide line. The sand burned our feet through the soles of our shoes. We tied the painter to a driftwood log and pulled out the emergency pack. There was little left: 2 tins of biscuits, a few flares, and a signal mirror. We found a shallow depression behind a dune and made shade with a canvas scrap. The captain split the men into pairs. 2 watched the boat, 2 searched inland for water. I went with Sergeant Blake up a rocky ridge. We carried our rifles and a compass. The ridge ran for half a mile before it dropped into dry country. The ground was scattered with stones and thorn scrub. No fresh tracks. We found a narrow wadi, its bed dry as dust. Flies clustered in the corners of our eyes. We turned back after an hour. On the way down, I saw movement near the coast, small dots against the glare. At first, I thought it was heat shimmer. Then the dots grew larger. Boats, 5 or 6 of them, low in the water. Lateen sails, brown and patched. They were coming in fast from the north, hugging the coastline. When we reached our cove, the others were already staring at them. The captain said we would stay put and show no threat. We hoisted the mirror and flashed short bursts toward the sea, hoping an Allied patrol might see. Nothing answered. The sails kept coming closer. By midday, we knew they were not patrols. They were too small and moved too close to shore. Men stood on the prows with rifles slung over their shoulders. The sails dropped as they neared the reef. Oars dipped into the water. I counted at least 20 men between the boats. They wore loose robes and bandoliers. Most were barefoot. The captain ordered weapons lowered but kept them close. He thought they might be fishermen. We had seen Arab dhows before in the Red Sea. But these men moved in formation. They came straight for the beach without calling out. When the first one stepped onto the sand, he raised his rifle and pointed at us. We froze. The captain raised his hands. Sergeant Blake did the same. The men in the boat shouted in a language none of us knew. One motioned toward our rifles and gestured for us to drop them. We obeyed. They picked them up and checked the actions like they knew the weapons. They spoke among themselves. One pointed south, another toward our boat. We understood none of it, but the tone was clear. They wanted us to move. 2 sailors hesitated. A man fired into the sand beside them. After that, no one resisted. We were herded into 2 lines and marched along the beach. The sun was at its highest point. The air shimmered. Sweat stung my eyes. The boats followed along the shore, staying just beyond the surf. The men kept us moving until the cliffs rose again and the sand gave way to sharp rock. There was a dry track there, barely visible, leading inland. The men motioned for us to follow it. We walked until the sea was a line behind us. My throat was cracked from thirst. A few men stumbled. The ones with rifles struck the ground beside them and waved them up. When we stopped, it was near a shallow hollow cut into the base of a ridge. There were lean-to shelters made of palm leaves and canvas scraps. Smoke from a small fire hung low. Women and children watched from a distance, silent. The armed men talked in short bursts and pointed at us. We were told to sit. Guards stood around us with rifles ready. One of them carried a pair of binoculars on a cord. He looked like the leader. He studied us one by one. When he reached me, he stopped and stared for a long time, then walked off. We had no idea who they were. They were not uniformed, not soldiers, but they were organized. They searched our pockets and took the compass, knives, and flares. One found the small US flag patch on my sleeve and tore it off. The captain tried to speak, but they ignored him. By sunset, they had taken everything but our clothes. They tied our wrists with rope and placed us under guard near the fire. The sound of the sea was gone, only the wind and the crackle of dry wood. The captain leaned close and whispered that we had to stay calm. He said someone would look for us. I nodded. But I knew the coastline stretched for hundreds of miles. We were one of many ships lost that month. The chance of a quick rescue was small. That night, the guards sang low, rough songs. We listened in silence. The stars were clear above the ridge. I kept my eyes on the sky and thought about the ships that passed far out to sea, unaware we were here, waiting. The guards' laughter carried across the sand, sharp and hollow. The next morning began with shouting and movement among the boats. More men arrived from the north. They carried old rifles and wore belts of ammunition. It looked like they had captured more gear from somewhere. One of them carried a signal lamp that looked British. That was when I realized this was more than a random encounter. They were not fishermen, they were organized raiders, and we were their prize. The leader pointed south and spoke sharply. We were ordered to stand. We knew we were being moved again, but not where or why. I remember the captain looking toward the sea one last time before turning inland. He said nothing. None of us did. They pushed us inland before the sun rose high. The air was heavy and dry. We walked in a single line, tied at the wrists with rough rope. My hands went numb by the second hour. The ground under our boots was a mix of gravel and sharp stone. The heat came early. The guards spoke little. When they did, it was short and sharp. They carried old Italian rifles and a few British Lee Enfields. Most wore bandoliers made of rope and leather. Their leader kept a small field glass and a pistol in his belt. He looked like a man used to giving orders. We crossed dry hills until the sea disappeared behind us. After a while, I could smell wood smoke. The ground sloped down into a shallow basin. There were more shelters there, made of canvas and driftwood. A few goats wandered between them. The place looked temporary, but lived in. They sat us under a patch of shade made with torn sailcloth. We got a single cup of water each. No one spoke. The captain kept his head up, watching every move. He told us quietly to remember everything we saw, the number of men, the direction we walked, the weapons. By afternoon, the air shimmered. A few of the guards grew restless. Some left with their rifles and never came back. The leader stayed close to us. He spoke to another man, pointing at our shoes, our belts, our gear. They gathered our things in a pile. The sailors' watches went first, then the knives. They even took a pair of dog tags from one of the Navy gunners. We heard gunfire later, far off toward the coast. Short bursts. The leader watched the horizon for a long time after that. He said something to his men, and two ran to the boats. The rest stayed with us. That night, we could see a faint glow on the horizon. It could have been a ship or another camp. The guards argued about it. I caught the word Aden more than once. The leader looked nervous for the first time. We took turns staying awake. The guards tied our ankles, but not too tight. The captain whispered that someone out there must have seen our smoke or our flares. Maybe the British patrols were searching this coast. At dawn, I saw a faint white wake far out to sea. It moved slow, steady, maybe a small ship. We tried to wave, but the guards pushed us down. The wake faded into the glare. It was gone in minutes. The captain stared after it for a long time. None of us said anything. We just listened to the surf in the distance and waited for whatever came next. We were moved again that night. The guards woke us before the moon rose. They cut the ropes from our ankles and pushed us into a single file. The leader walked ahead, holding a lantern wrapped in cloth. The wind had changed. It carried the smell of salt again, which meant we were near the coast. The ground turned rough. We climbed over low ridges and dry gullies. The sound of waves came and went. The men whispered to each other but kept their rifles ready. We walked for hours. Every time someone stumbled, a guard pulled him up by the collar. By dawn, we reached another inlet. It was narrow with black rock on both sides. There were old boats pulled high onto the sand, patched and worn. The camp here was larger, maybe 30 men, all armed. They greeted our guards and began to argue right away. The leader from the first group shouted and pointed at us. One of the new men, older and broader, waved him off. His men carried British canteens and wore pieces of uniform. They searched us again. They seemed more interested in our gear than in us. One found the captain's wristwatch and passed it around laughing. Another cut the buttons from a sailor's jacket. They argued over who would keep what. The tension built until the older man raised his rifle and fired into the air. The noise echoed between the rocks and stopped them cold. We were pushed to one side of the beach. The older man gave orders that sounded final. The first group of guards left with two of the boats. Their sails caught the wind and faded north. We watched them go until the last one disappeared behind the rocks. The men who remained looked better armed. Some wore captured belts and cartridge pouches. A few had bayonets fixed. They spoke in short bursts, and one of them watched the sea with the binoculars. It felt like we were being kept for someone else. That night we heard a motor offshore, slow and uneven. It sounded like a small ship, maybe a patrol boat. The guards heard it too. They ran to cover their boats with nets. One grabbed a lamp and began signaling toward the water. Short flashes, deliberate. We froze. The captain leaned forward trying to see. The flashes answered. Whoever was out there knew their code. It was not a distress signal. It was a message. I felt it then. We were not just captives. We were part of something larger, some exchange or deal we didn't understand. The guards looked pleased, almost relieved. Whatever they had arranged, it was happening soon. The wind rose before dawn. Sand blew across the beach. The sea turned dark and rough. The lamp signal stopped, but the guards stayed alert. They packed their rifles and talked in low tones. The older man kept glancing at the horizon. When the light came, the sea was empty again. The guards looked uneasy. One climbed the rocks to keep watch. Another kicked sand over the fire. The captain whispered to me, his voice steady. He said that if anyone came ashore now, it would not be to rescue us. We waited in silence. The sound of waves filled the air. Every man there knew something was coming. We just didn't know from which direction. The next day began quiet. Too quiet. The wind dropped and the sea turned flat again. The guards sat in the shade, smoking and sharpening their knives. A few played with the rifles, checking the bolts, cleaning the barrels. They seemed restless. The older man, the one now leading them, paced along the ridge above the inlet. He had a small telescope and a scrap of paper folded into his pocket. By late morning, 3 boats appeared from the south. They moved faster than the wind could carry them. Motors, not sails. The sound was dull but steady. The men on the beach started shouting and waving their arms. Our guards gathered their gear quickly. The new arrivals wore a mix of clothing, some in khaki, some in robes. One had a British sun helmet, another carried an Italian submachine gun. They looked better supplied than the rest. They came ashore and talked with our leader for a long time. The voices were hard, clipped, almost like they were arguing about money. When it ended, the new group took over. The first guards faded back toward their boats and rowed north again. We were now under new control. The leader of this new group carried himself differently. He had a scar across his cheek and a calm, slow way of speaking. He looked like he had done this before. He ordered 2 men to drag a box from one of the boats. When they opened it, I saw a signal lamp, the kind used on ships. It was dented but still working. Next to it was a torn map with British markings. I recognized the grid lines. They were using Allied charts. The leader spread the map on the sand. He pointed at our position, then at a spot farther south. He said a word we understood. Trade. Then he tapped the signal lamp. It hit me then. They planned to trade us. For weapons, fuel, something valuable. We were part of a deal along the coast. That afternoon, they moved us again. They forced us into their boats, 5 at a time, wrists tied but not blindfolded. The sea was calm but hot enough to burn the skin. The boats hugged the coastline, avoiding open water. I counted landmarks, ridges, cliffs, small inlets. Every few miles, one of the guards marked something on the chart. We landed before dusk in another inlet. This one had old stone walls near the shore, maybe ruins from before the war. The ground was hard and cracked. We were lined up again, checked for weapons, and made to sit near a broken wall. The guards were more alert here. They spoke little, and one kept the lamp ready. I watched the captain. He was studying the hills behind us, maybe thinking of escape, but there was no cover. The open desert stretched for miles. The first sign of trouble came with the wind. A storm front rolled in from the east. The air turned cold, then hot again. Fine sand began to swirl. The guards grew nervous. They covered the lamp with cloth and checked the boats. The leader looked at the sky and gave sharp orders. When the storm hit, it came hard. The wind roared down the inlet, tearing at the canvas shelters. Sand filled the air until we couldn't see. The guards shouted over the noise, trying to keep the boats from breaking loose. One of them fell, screaming, when a mast snapped. The storm lasted less than an hour, but when it cleared, the sea was different. The light had changed. The horizon looked washed out. Far above, I saw a small aircraft, a twin-engine plane, high and steady. It flew north without turning. The guards fired 2 shots into the air, maybe to signal it, maybe out of anger. The plane didn't react. When the air cleared, the leader checked the lamp. Its glass had cracked in the wind. He tried to fix it, but it wouldn't hold. I saw him curse under his breath. The chart, too, had been half buried in sand. He brushed it off, looked at it for a long time, then folded it carefully. That night, the mood in the camp changed. The guards were tense. They kept the lamp lit, flashing short signals toward the sea, but no one answered. A few men argued quietly. One pointed at us and then at the boats. I caught enough to understand. They were thinking about moving us inland again. The captain leaned toward me. His voice was low, rough. He said we were running out of time. If we were taken inland, no one would find us. I knew he was right. The coastline was our only link to rescue. He told me he had kept a small match tin hidden in his boot. The wax seal had held through the storm. Inside were a few matches wrapped in oil paper and a strip of red signal cloth. He said we might need it soon. I nodded and told him I'd be ready. The night went long. The guards kept watch in pairs, the sea stayed flat, the air heavy. Around midnight, I saw the faintest flash of light far offshore. Not lightning. A short, deliberate blink. It came again, then vanished. The captain saw it too. He whispered, "That's a ship." We both knew what that meant. Someone was out there. Someone searching. He looked at the tin in his boot, then back at the sea. He said nothing else. We waited for dawn, knowing it would bring the moment when we had to act. Dawn came quiet. The wind had stopped. The sea was flat like glass. The guards were half asleep, their rifles resting on their knees. The captain gave me a look, short and clear. It was time. He slid the small tin from his boot. Inside were the matches and the folded cloth. We had one chance. The plan was simple. Wait until the guards turned toward the shore patrol, then light the signal low behind the rocks. The flare would be weak, but if a ship was out there, it might be enough. I crouched behind a flat rock near the old wall. The captain moved beside me, pretending to fix his ropes. When the guards looked away, I struck the match. The sound was soft, but in the still air, it felt loud. The flame caught fast. I held it to the strip of cloth coated in grease. It flared low, red and steady. The captain used his body to block the view from the guards. The signal burned for less than a minute, then died out. Smoke rose thin into the windless air. I buried the ash under sand and went still. For a long time, nothing happened. The guards went about their morning, arguing over a kettle of water. I began to think no one had seen it. Then I heard it, the deep thrum of an engine far out to sea. Slow, heavy, steady. It was not a fishing boat. The guards heard it too. They ran to the beach, scanning the horizon. The leader climbed the rocks with his binoculars. His voice cut the air, sharp and urgent. The guards grabbed their rifles. I crawled to the edge of the wall and looked. Out past the reef, a small vessel moved through the glare. Low profile, gray hull, white wake, British markings. A motor launch, maybe part of a search team. The guards shouted. 2 ran to untie the boats. Others fired their rifles into the air. The captain ordered us to stay down. He whispered that, if they tried to move us, we would resist. It was the first time he said that word. The leader kept signaling with the cracked lamp, flashing fast bursts toward the launch. The boat did not answer. It slowed instead. I saw figures on the deck, armed, crouched, watching the shore. Then the guards began shooting. The first rounds hit the water short. The launch turned broadside and fired one warning burst from a deck gun, a short staccato echo. The sound rolled across the bay and into the hills. The guards panicked. Some dropped their gear and ran inland. Others fired wildly toward the sea. One bullet cracked the stone near my head. I hit the sand and pressed flat. The launch stopped firing. I saw movement on the cliffs to our left, men in uniform, advancing low and steady. A patrol, British or maybe from the Camel Corps. Their rifles fired in short, controlled bursts. Dust kicked up around the guards. The leader shouted for his men to hold, but most had already broken. The older ones grabbed the nearest boats and shoved them into the surf. The tide was low and the hulls scraped on coral. The captain looked at me and then at the red cloth still half buried. He said, "That's our chance." He cut the rope around his wrists on a sharp rock and helped the nearest sailor do the same. I freed my hands next. Bullets cracked over the ridge. The patrol moved closer. One guard turned and saw us loose. He raised his rifle, but the captain was faster. He tackled him, driving him into the sand. The rifle went off once, harmless. I pulled it away and fired back toward the ridge. One quick shot to cover the patrol's line. The guards scattered. Some dropped their rifles. Some dove into the sea. The launch moved in closer, engines high. Its bow gun opened up, short controlled bursts. Water leapt in white lines around the fleeing boats. The patrol reached the ridge above us. Their leader waved a signal flag toward the launch. I heard the sharp whistle of a Vickers gun answering from the beach. The fight turned fast and loud. We stayed low, crawling toward the surf. The captain carried the wounded radio operator over his shoulder. 2 sailors helped drag him. The patrol's fire grew heavier, forcing the guards into cover. By the time we reached the waterline, the launch was 50 yards offshore. A small boat was already coming in to meet us. The British officer on the ridge waved again, shouting toward the crew below. I turned once before stepping into the water. The inlet behind us was full of smoke and dust. A guard tried to climb the rocks but fell back under a burst of fire. The red cloth we had burned earlier still left a dark mark in the sand. The small boat reached us fast. 2 sailors pulled us aboard. The captain was the last to climb in. He looked back at the ridge, checking for the rest of our men. Not all were there. 2 had fallen somewhere behind near the wall. There was no going back for them. The launch turned to sea. The engines roared. The smoke from the inlet faded behind us as the coastline shrank. None of us spoke. We just watched the land slide away, knowing the fight was still going on for whoever was left. The launch stayed close to the surf, covering the inlet. The officer on deck gave sharp hand signals, and the gunner adjusted his aim higher into the rocks. Every burst was short, measured. The air filled with the smell of cordite and sea salt. We crouched near the bow, soaked to the skin. The radio operator lay across 2 wooden slats, pale and still breathing. A medic worked over him, wrapping a bandage tight across his ribs. The captain sat beside him, holding the man's hand steady through the roll of the waves. Behind us, the patrol on shore moved down toward the water. Their uniforms were khaki with wide-brimmed hats. British Somaliland Camel Corps, by the look of them. They advanced in pairs, firing controlled volleys toward the cliffs, where the last raiders were pinned down. The scene was steady, almost quiet between bursts. No shouting, no panic. One of the guards broke from cover and tried to reach a boat. The launch gunner tracked him and fired a short burst. The man dropped instantly, disappearing behind the rocks. Another ran inland, firing as he went. A rifle from the ridge snapped once, and the runner fell forward, motionless. The officer on the launch watched through his binoculars. He spoke to the helmsman, who nodded and eased the throttle. The boat drifted closer until the keel scraped sand. A rope ladder went over the side. The first group of rescued men climbed down and waded to shore under cover from the deck gun. I followed. The water came to my waist. The sand was soft and full of shell fragments. When I reached the beach, the heat hit hard again. The British patrol leader met us there, a tall man with a red beard. He asked no questions, just pointed toward the inland side where the last gunfire echoed faintly. We took position behind a dune. The patrol moved in a line, firing short bursts at the caves along the ridge. The sound bounced between the rocks. Then silence. The officer raised his hand. No more shots came. When it was over, we counted our people. 18 had made it to the beach. 2 were missing, last seen near the old wall. The patrol found one body later, half covered in sand. The other was gone, maybe taken inland by the few raiders who escaped. The British collected weapons and documents from the camp. They moved quickly, trained for it. They found the cracked signal lamp, a torn British chart, and a ledger written in Arabic and Italian. It listed trade items, rifles, fuel, and something called crew. That word made sense of everything. We had been a form of payment. The launch fired 2 green flares into the sky, calling in the sloop waiting beyond the reef. The flare smoke drifted across the inlet in thin trails. The tide began to rise, washing over the footprints and blood in the sand. The captain walked the length of the beach once more before turning to the officer. They spoke briefly. Then we were ordered back to the launch. The wounded went first, carried in makeshift stretchers of sailcloth and poles. The rest of us climbed in silence. The engine started, low and steady. As we pulled away, I looked back at the inlet. The patrol was still there, stacking captured rifles and setting fire to the shelters. The smoke rose straight into the white sky. The sea reflected it, calm and flat. The sloop came into view by mid-morning. Gray hull, twin masts, light armament, British flag high. The launch came alongside and we climbed up one by one. The crew handed us mugs of water. Nobody spoke much. The air felt cooler offshore. Once aboard, the ship's doctor examined us. Burns, cuts, dehydration, a few broken ribs. Nothing worse than that. The radio operator was still alive. The doctor said he might make it. The captain nodded once, slow, and went to the rail to look back at the shore. The sloop turned north toward Aden. The engines hummed deep in the hull. Behind us, the Somali coast faded into haze, a thin brown line against the horizon. The last thing I saw was the inlet, just a small curve of sand now, still burning. The captain stood there a long time, his hands on the rail. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "That's done," he said. And it was. We reached Aden after 2 days at sea. The sloop made steady time through calm water. The British crew treated us well. They gave us dry clothes, water, and hard biscuits. The smell of fuel and salt stayed in the air. We slept on deck under canvas sheets, too tired to speak. When we entered the harbor, the sky was hazy with dust from the city. The docks were busy with cargo ships, small patrol craft, and hospital launches. The sloop tied up to a Royal Navy pier. Medical teams waited. We were counted, names taken, ranks checked. The wounded went first. The radio operator was carried off on a stretcher. His pulse was weak but steady. The captain stayed by him until he was moved to the field hospital. The rest of us lined up for inspection. A British lieutenant read our names off a clipboard and made notes beside each. The air smelled of disinfectant and diesel. We were taken to a small debrief room in the naval compound. The walls were bare. A flag hung behind a wooden desk. A Royal Navy commander asked questions while a clerk typed. We told them everything we could remember: where the ship went down, the direction of the current, the number of men, the time of attack, the position of the inlet, the rifles, the chart, the lamp. They listened without interrupting. When we finished, they showed us a map. It marked several small coves along the coast between Ras Hafun and Bandar Murkayo. They said raids had increased since the shipping losses in early 1942. Some of the men attacking ships were local, others deserters or smugglers using old Italian gear. We had run into one of those mixed groups. The commander wrote our coordinates on a separate sheet and passed it to a political officer from the British Colonial Service. The man wore a khaki tunic and spoke quietly. He asked if any of our captors had uniforms or badges. We said no. He nodded and said that fit the reports. The British collected the ledger, the chart, and the cracked lamp from the sloop. They sealed them in brown paper marked intelligence copy and stamped the date. The officer told the captain those items would be sent to Cairo for analysis. Later that evening, we were moved to a barracks outside the port. Each man received a ration of water, tea, and bread. The doctor checked us again. 2 sailors had infections from rope burns. The rest were sunburned and exhausted but stable. The next morning, a small memorial service was held on the dock for the 2 men killed during the rescue. Their names were read out, followed by a short prayer. The captain stood at attention the whole time. When it ended, he saluted once and said nothing. That afternoon, the Royal Navy began loading for another coastal patrol. The same sloop that rescued us would go back to Somali waters. A young petty officer told me they planned to destroy any camps found near our position. He said nothing more. We stayed in Aden for 4 days. Every day, officers came to ask more questions. They wanted details about the equipment the raiders carried, how they spoke, and what languages we heard. We answered as best we could. Most of it matched earlier intelligence. Before we left, the British commander handed the captain a copy of their report. It listed our rescue as Incident 14/42, Gulf of Aden. It confirmed 2 American fatalities, 6 wounded and 18 recovered. The report stated that one organized raiding group had been eliminated and several more were under surveillance. We boarded a transport for Suez soon after. The heat was no easier there, but the sea felt safer. The crew treated us like part of their own. None of us talked much. When the captain spoke, it was about duty, not luck. On our final morning in Aden, I looked back at the harbor from the ship's deck. The sloop was already gone, heading south again. Somewhere along that coast, the smoke had probably faded, the inlet empty again. But the sound of that rescue, the gunfire, the engine, the whistle of the launch stayed clear in my head. The official papers called it a minor engagement. To us, it was survival. We were still Marines. We had done our job, held together, and made it home. We reached Suez in early August. The canal was crowded with ships waiting for convoy orders. Our transport anchored near Port Tufik. The air smelled of fuel and dust. British and American personnel moved everywhere, loading trucks and crates. We were taken to a joint operations office for more interviews. This time it was U.S. Navy officers and a Marine major. They reviewed the British report and asked for confirmation on every point. They wanted to know how long we had been held, what weapons the raiders used, and what markings we saw on the chart. The captain spoke first. His voice was steady, every detail exact. He named the coordinates, the estimated time of each move, the number of guards, and the sequence of the attack. When he finished, the major looked at him for a long time, then said quietly that our survival had filled a major gap in the Allied coastal patrol logs. They asked me next. I told them about the matches, the signal cloth, and the flare. The major wrote something in his notebook, then asked if I still had the compass we lost. I told him they took it. He nodded, made another note, and said that several U.S. ships had gone missing along that same stretch of coast in the past 2 months. The raiders had been using captured navigation tools to mark where ships went down. The next day, we received written statements to sign. Each page listed our names, service numbers, and the line, "Rescued from captivity, Somali coast, July 1942." The report was clear, factual, and short. It carried the British and American seals. After that, we were reassigned. Half of our detachment was sent back to the United States aboard a returning transport. The rest, including me, were attached to a Marine Guard unit in Suez. The captain requested to remain until the last man was accounted for. His request was approved. A week later, word came through Aden that British patrols had destroyed 2 more raider camps along the coast. They recovered fragments of Italian ammunition, crates of stolen goods, and part of the ledger we had seen. The name Crew Exchange was written in English on one of the pages. It proved the trade existed. The documents we handed over were sent to Cairo, then to London. After that, we heard nothing more. The records vanished into intelligence files. The incident was classified as a localized engagement of limited scope. Officially, we were listed as survivors of a merchant vessel sunk by hostile action. The part about the raiders never made it into open reports. By September, our detachment was down to 6. The others were shipped home or absorbed into convoy escorts. The radio operator survived but lost the use of one arm. He was sent to a hospital in Alexandria. The captain stayed until his orders came through, then sailed west on a Navy transport. Before he left, he came to the dock where I was standing guard. He said only, "You did your duty." "That's what counts," I nodded. He shook my hand and walked aboard without looking back. I remained in Suez through the end of the year. Our unit guarded fuel depots and supply convoys bound for the desert front. The war moved on. New names replaced old ones. Most of the men who had been with me on the Meridian Point scattered across other commands. One night, months later, I was called to the signals office. A courier from Aden had delivered a pouch marked "Recovered Items." Inside was a photograph of the cracked lamp, cleaned and mounted for record. Below it was a note typed in British format. It read, "Object recovered from Somali coast. Previously used in illicit signaling operations. Associated with U.S. survivors, Incident 14/42. That was the last I heard of it. By then, the war had shifted north. The coast that had nearly taken us was far behind. But sometimes when the wind came in off the Red Sea, carrying the smell of salt and heat, I could still hear that launch engine, low and steady, the sound that meant we were alive. The last record from that operation was made at 0640 hours. July 22, 1942. The Royal Navy sloop HMS Lark signaled, "Rescue complete, all survivors aboard." The deck logs showed calm seas, visibility 8 miles, light wind from the northeast. The inlet we left behind burned until mid-morning. The smoke thinned and disappeared as the ship turned north toward Aden. The coordinates were written clean in black ink, then underlined once. The final report listed 20 crew members and 8 Marines recovered. 2 Marines and 1 sailor confirmed dead, 1 missing, all others treated and accounted for. The recovered equipment included 6 rifles, 1 damaged signal lamp, and a torn British coastal chart marked in pencil. The chart and lamp were transferred to Naval Intelligence in Aden under file code 14/42 Somali coast. The ledger taken from the raider camp was forwarded to Cairo. Medical summaries noted dehydration, exposure, and minor wounds. Every man fit for duty was reassigned within 3 weeks. The ship's loss was recorded under enemy surface action, probable auxiliary cruiser. The paragraph closed with the words, "Incident resolved, survivors repatriated." The final entry on the British side was dated August 3, 1942. It confirmed that the inlet south of Ras Hafun had been cleared and all enemy material destroyed. The location was marked on their coastal map with a single red X. That map, folded in quarters, now sits in the Naval Historical Record Office. File shelf B17. The note beside it reads, U.S. Marine Detachment, SS Meridian Point, rescued July 1942. End of file. Don't turn off your lights yet. If you like the video, hit like and watch the next amazing horror story showing on your screen.